Welcome to the second part of Socrates' trial and death. So let's go to the formal accusations that Meletus, Lycon, and Anytus they allege Socrates has committed. Um, so the first one, the accusation of that he has corrupted the young. There are several arguments here that he uses. First, when he wants to, first of all, he questions them in the same way he questions people in the marketplace, in the agora. So it's again a dialectic, and he calls up Meletus or Meletus, and he says, look, who cares for the education of the young, right? And Meletus ultimately says that the people that care for the education of the young, who are concerned about the education of the young, and things like this, are the people who are sort of skilled and can do well in the educating the young, are basically everyone except Socrates, right? So, and Socrates kind of demonstrates that that this is an absurd, preposterous position to take, and thus that he wants to sort of demonstrate to the jury that Meletus has not really thought about this carefully. It's absurd because even if you think about who's qualified to educate or train horses, you would obviously not think that everyone is, right? I mean, there are people who are skilled, right, have that kind of skill. And so if you think that about horses, certainly we would also think that about our children, our next generation, that only certain people are qualified to educate them. And so he kind of wants to show that Meletus is not really serious, or he's not a credible sort of accuser. Then he has another kind of argument where he says, Meletus, do corrupt people or evil people harm those around them? And Meletus says yes. And then Socrates says, then does anybody want to be harmed intentionally? And he says no. Nobody wants to intentionally harm themselves, right? So you have sort of two premises here, but look, if that's true, then why would I go around corrupting the young people that are close to me and that come to hear me speak? Because that seems that if I do it intentionally, then I'm corrupting people close to me who ultimately will become evil and then can harm me. So indirectly, I'm kind of harming myself. And that makes no sense. Now, I don't know about this argument, because it seems like if the argument is true, then nobody would ever harm anyone close to them, or no one would ever corrupt anyone close to them. Although Socrates, the argument seems interesting, and Socrates says, so if the argument is true, the conclusion either has to be that I don't corrupt them, or that if I do, I don't do it intentionally, and that would be a whole different sort of accusation. When it comes to the formal accusation of not believing in the Greek gods, again, Socrates questions Meletus, and he says, do you mean that I don't believe in any gods, or do you mean that I believe in some and not all, or what exactly is your sort of accusation? And Meletus says, I accuse you of not believing in any of the gods, in any gods at all. And Socrates points out that again is absurd, because he points out that he readily admits at the same time that I believe in divine things And how could I believe in divine things if I don't believe in any kind of divinity, right? So, um, so those are the two sort of formal arguments. There's also interesting parts where Meletus seems to get upset, and Socrates seems to tell the crowds to please not create a disturbance. It seems like maybe he's said something, and the crowd is kind of like either booing or I don't know, or doing something. Um, Anyways, the the jury, of course, finds Socrates guilty, and um, at this point, Meletus says that he he proposes the death penalty for Socrates. Socrates, they it is the option of not philosophizing uh, is something that is discussed, and Socrates says that that is not an option for him. And so, in many ways, there's a sense in which Socrates is the martyr of philosophy. He's kind of the philosophical hero, right? Because he dies for philosophy. He could have left Athens. He could have negotiated his life and said, I won't philosophize anymore. I promise I won't ask any more questions. I won't examine anyone anymore. I won't talk to the young people. I'll stop doing philosophy. But he says that he can't do that. He says he's sort of on a mission from God, and he says that he will always philosophize until he breathes. As long as he can breathe, he will philosophize. Therefore, that is not an option. And so the jury goes back, finds, sentences Socrates to death. Okay, so at this point, there a lot of important things arise in the apology. His view of the afterlife. Obviously, he's facing death. He thinks that he has this argument where he says either death is nothing, right? You just sleep, and if you've ever slept, had a great night's sleep, you realize that's not that bad. Or death is something great, where we can actually continue to live, and in that afterworld, I can continue to philosophize. It would be wonderful. I could ask questions of all kinds of heroes and people that I would love, that I didn't have the good fortune of having met, and maybe in the afterlife I will have that opportunity. So either way, death doesn't seem like a bad thing. So again, he reiterates his mission of questioning. He compares himself to a gadfly, right? To a lethargic horse, right? Which is the state of Athens. Laziness, people who don't want to think, people who don't want to examine themselves, people who do not want to be critical. And he is the gadfly. He's the one who questions, the one who prods everyone uh, to examine their beliefs. And this is a very dangerous thing to do in society, right? To seek truth, to go beyond sort of dogmatism, and to question everything. Again, could be very dangerous, right? So, but he compares himself to a gadfly. He ultimately says, "Look, you think you're hurting me, but you're only hurting yourself." This seems paradoxical because ultimately you can't really hurt me. He thinks that a good person can never be ultimately hurt by another who's evil. So what he means by this is basically the idea that we are identical with our souls, our minds, not our bodies. So whatever you do to my body, that's fine, but that's not harming me. I am, my integrity has to do with my beliefs, the things I think. That's who I am. So my mental identity, my soul, right? the only way I can harm my soul is by deviating from the good. And the only way I can deviate from the good is by intentionally making decisions that are morally wrong or evil. And so those decisions have to be intentional. Those decisions have to be uh, committed and consented to freely. And thus, the only person who can ultimately harm me is me. We can only harm ourselves. And in this sense, by you executing me, taking my life for not having done anything wrong, this is committing an injustice. I have not done anything wrong. You're committing an injustice, and therefore you are harming yourself and not me. I hope that makes sense. Socrates thinks that he tells the Athenians that the Olympians, the sport characters, can give you apparent happiness or happiness that is ephemeral, that is short lived, but this is not true happiness. Only true happiness can only come from a soul, a mind that is in harmony, that is um, that 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 seeks knowledge, right? Uh, so we will talk more about this in the Republic, but true happiness can only be found inside oneself, internally, mentally, psychologically, or in the soul, in the mind, however you want to phrase it. It's not something that could be found in the exterior world. So it can be found through money, wealth, honor, any of that. So that will only give you temporary happiness or apparent happiness. Real, true happiness is something Socrates thinks that he can give people, the Athenians. And all of this is sort of connected, right? Ultimately, Socrates believes that what we should be caring about, what we should ultimately be concerned about, is the condition of our soul. And that is why he thinks of our minds. And so the conditions of our soul can only improve when we examine our minds, our beliefs. This is why he says the unexamined life is not worth living. Examining one's life is the ultimate quest, the ultimate mission of life for Socrates. I hope this makes sense. I hope it corresponds well with the reading. I hope it helps you answer the questions. Thank you.